So, hey everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really thrilled to have all of you here and that I can be here and talk to you guys this afternoon. So my name is Ruth and I founded the podcast Optimistically Depressed. I chose Optimistically Depressed because I feel like that just perfectly describes me. And I will tell you more about why I feel that describes me in a moment. So first of all, I want to tell you about something that my grandmother used to always say to me whenever I was sitting and talking with her about some of the problems that I was going through at that time. She would always say, "Ruth, everyone has a story." And so it's that phrase that actually motivated me to start Optimistically Depressed, because that's the thing. Everybody has a story. We all have our struggles. We all have the things, the walls that we've hit, the ways that we've fallen down that have dragged us down and made us feel like there's nothing more that we can contribute, nothing more that we can give to this world. And there's a certain way that that's happened to me, a few ways that that's happened to me. So I'm 32 years old. I have 3 kids. And I've been diagnosed with postpartum depression 7 years ago. I was depressed before that, I just didn't realize it, because all I had to go on when it came to like my idea of what depression was, what mental illness was my personal experience. And that was my father, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. And so it was a very scary idea. I kind of thought that anyone who had who had a mental illness, that meant that it was ripping their family apart. That meant that there were violent outbursts, that it was uncontrollable. And so, because nobody would talk about what their personal experience was. So you only have this very small circle, this very small world that you're looking at for a reference point. And so I was depressed. I didn't realize it. I tried talking to some people about it, and I would talk about like how I was, feeling like everything was just wrong, right? And I would have people look at me and they'd try to like correct my feelings. They'd be like, "Oh, but it's not that bad, and like you have a great life." And it's just kind of like, I know I have a great life. That's why I'm in such a predicament, because I don't feel like I have a great life. I feel like I can't go on. I don't feel the point in living anymore. Like, you wake up in the morning and you're kind of like, "Oh my gosh, again, I woke up again. I have to do this again." And then you're using all of your mental energy just to step out of bed. And then, you have these things that are pushing on you for your, these responsibilities, right? These ways that you need to show up. And so in my case, I had kids that needed me. And oh my goodness, I love them. Of course I love them. And, that was one of the other things that people would take the opportunity to remind me of. It's like, yeah, I know. I'm the one that had the biological connection with the kids. You don't have to remind me that I love my kids. I don't love myself. I don't love my life. There's just something wrong. There's something wrong. And people who don't know what it feels like to have that something wrong don't know. And that needs to be fixed. There's something very wrong with the society that can't understand what it is like to sit and look at feelings in the face and say, that feeling is fear. Why do I feel fear? That feeling is anxiety. Why do I feel anxiety? And then as it turns out, when you look at it in the face, it stops feeling as scary. Do you ever notice that? Or with people, do you ever have a person that you're kind of like, "I don't like you." And every time they walk into the room, you're like, and then all of a sudden you learn something about them, and it's like, "Oh my goodness, you're not a jerk, you're a hurt person. You know, like people don't wake up in the morning and they're like, I'm gonna find a way to be like the meanest, most bad, jerkiest person on the planet. And I'm gonna try to like bother Ruth and make her wanna swear at me. You know what, no, I think some people actually do try to do that. But I think most people don't try to do that, right? We are trying to survive. We're each doing what we feel needs to be done in order to survive. So when we're hurt, we don't understand that there are certain things that we do and say that actually hurts other people because we're too focused on trying to repair whatever it is that's going on inside of us. And when we don't take the time to sit down and look at what that is, then we're not going to figure out a way to get out of it. And when we feel like we're so alone and we're the only people that are feeling these things, we're going to be ashamed and we're going to be afraid and we're not going to talk about it. So that's when Optimistically Depressed comes into the scene. This is after a bit of a roller coaster. Let me back up for a second. Optimistically Depressed, not on the scene yet. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I went through. So I had prenatal depression with my second child. And I didn't know that I had it because I didn't know that it was a thing because it, surprise, is another thing people don't talk about. People talk about postpartum depression more now, and that's great. And that's what actually helped me notice that there was something wrong after I had my second child. But when I had my second child, I was so far into that tunnel of hopelessness because I'd been in there for 9 months already. And then finally, I was like, wait a minute. I don't think it's normal to wait for my husband to go to work and then I put down my children for a nap and then go to bed and cry for 2 hours straight and then try to hide it and pretend that I'm okay. I was actually convinced that if I were to tell my husband, Sean, this wonderful man right here, that I was struggling with wanting to not wake up in the morning, I was afraid that if he knew that, he would leave me. He would be like, you're a nutball, and leave. Because, like, that's what happened with my dad. That was my only point of reference. Now, in retrospect, I know that's not true, but that's when I finally started talking about it. I went to my doctor after I had my second child. I talked to her about how I was feeling. And she actually didn't look at me like I was crazy, which was a great relief. And she said, you know what? It sounds like you have postpartum depression. And so it was like, okay, first step. That was so good. To have like a label, even though we all kind of like don't really like labels and that kind of thing, I needed that label because I needed to be like, okay, it's not me. I'm not the problem. I have postpartum depression. That over there, that's the problem. When you can actually point at something and say, okay, you're no good, but I'm going to have to deal with you, so let's figure out what we can do. So then that's when I decided that, now at that time I was terrified of the idea of going on medication, so I didn't. I decided that I was going to exercise and I was going to have a strict routine. So I was running every other day. I was trying to predict every single little thing that was going to happen, right? How often can you do that? Like, especially when you have kids. They're going to smear poop on things. You don't want to predict that because then it's like an acknowledgement of how depressing your life really is. So it wasn't working. And there was this point when I was pregnant with our third child that I was in the kitchen. I remember I was emptying the dishwasher. We don't really need that, do we? We don't need that. I was emptying the dishwasher. I was standing over by the cutlery drawer, okay? And then one kid, like, I don't even know what they did. They made a sound. Oh, thank you. They made a sound, and it was like, they need me, right? And I'm like thinking like, no, because like I need to put this fork in the fork place in the cutlery drawer, and I cannot divide my attention. I can't take my attention away from this one thing in order to address this other problem because it's too much. It's too much. So I stood there and I was frozen. And I stood there it felt like centuries, but it must have been just a couple minutes. And finally, I was able to get my phone, and I called Sean. And I said, Sean, you need to come home because I just can't. He came home, he looked at me, he could tell there was something wrong, and so he said, you have to go to the hospital. And that was terrifying, but I knew he was right, so I went. I didn't know where to go, so I went to the maternity ward. And I was like, hey, so I'm having a bit of a meltdown. I was hoping like maybe you could help me out. And the woman looked at me and she was like, oh, you know, and she said it so casually, you need to go to Psych Emerge. And it was like, nope, I'm not gonna do that. So I was like, oh, thank you so much for your time. I think I'm just gonna go home though, so thank you. I started like turning around, and then she's like, obviously she knew what was going on. I was having a meltdown inside my head, and she was like, wait, no, it's okay. Like, I actually think that I might have somebody here who can help you out. So she took me into this room. It was this waiting room behind closed doors, thank goodness, because I didn't want people to look at the crazy pregnant woman who was losing her mind. And then she got a counselor who happened to be free. She took me in. I'm like fighting back tears. I finally sit down and I looked at her, and I could only whisper because everything was just gone. And I said, I'm not crazy. And she looked at me and she was like, I know you're not crazy. And then in my head, I was like, you are such a liar. Like, I am obviously crazy. Look at me. Like, I stumbled into the hospital, the wrong hospital, and I'm like all teary and delirious. And I managed to somehow crazy my way into this chair without an appointment. So there was something really wrong. I hit rock bottom. So they were so great, and I ended up getting in for weekly counseling sessions, which was wonderful. But then I decided that I needed to go back to school. So I did that, and because it kept me so distracted from my feelings, I then was like, well, I don't need to go to counseling anymore. I'm fine. So I stopped going to counseling and I did school instead. I had our third child, and by that time I was obviously done going to school. They frown on you bringing newborns into classes. And then I was home for 4 months, and I couldn't take it anymore. It just came back. I was waking up every morning, and it was like, I felt like my rib cage was just crushing. And then I would get up out of bed, I would get the kids dressed, you know, blah, 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 same thing every day. So difficult to get through. And so then I decided that I needed to go back into the workforce. So my husband is so supportive through this whole thing, while knowing that I'm just coming, like, you know how you're watching somebody and you're like, I know what you have to do, but if I tell you what you have to do, then you're not going to listen, so I just am going to have to watch you do this, like stumble through until you finally reach the conclusion that you need to go on medication. But so he just was supportive. He helped me through that journey. I went back into the workforce. I worked part-time for a couple of years, and then I worked full-time for a year. Things were pretty okay. I was able to, again, like ignore my emotions for long enough to be able to kind of fool myself into believing that everything was okay. I had a handle on it again. And then my grandmother, who I quoted to you earlier, everyone has a story, she got sick. She had cancer. It was very far advanced, and she died. I was able to be with her when she died, and like that was it. She was a woman that I called every week. Like I called her every week. She was the person that like helped me stay sane. And then she was gone. And then everything started to take a very physical effect on me now. All the things that I was feeling, they were starting to show up in physical form. So I got alopecia. I started losing my hair. On the way back from her funeral, I found a large bald spot on the back of my head. And then learned that it was alopecia. It had been triggered by the stress. And then over the next year, I'd find these new bald spots on the back of my head or on my arms. But like, who really cares about that? Thank goodness it wasn't over like an eyebrow. That would have just totally ruined me. But the thing was, it bothered me so much because I knew that it was showing that there was a different problem. It wasn't just that I was losing my hair. It was that there was an underlying problem that was causing me to lose my hair. So one day, I was sitting in church. I was listening to my pastor, and he started talking about how he had depression. And he was explaining the way that he felt before he went on medication. And he was saying, like, everything that he was saying, I'm sitting there and I'm like, that's exactly how I feel. But the thing was, that was how I was feeling after I was doing all of these things to manage my depression. It turns out I wasn't managing it at all. It wasn't just a thing, in my case, it wasn't just a thing that I needed to like think through and like set up routine and keep myself busy in order to, keep handled, or however you want to call that. There was a chemical imbalance happening. I wasn't getting the stuff that my brain needed in order to help me feel like I had a handle on things, to make me just feel okay. So that's when I finally went to the doctor. I started telling her how I was feeling again, being honest about this, and she was like, it sounds to me like you should go on medication. And I was like, yeah, okay, I should go on medication. And thank goodness, like for me, it actually took effect immediately. Like it was like the day of. This doesn't happen very often. Usually it takes 4 to 6 weeks. I was fortunate, it happened immediately. And I just remember waking up and all the pain was gone. And it was like, I feel okay. And then I could get up and I could just like take care of things that needed to be taken care of, and I was okay. And then like I suddenly had like energy to be like more engaged with my kids. I had energy to be like more ambitious, which was something that I just didn't realize was possible. Like I had spent so much time looking at other people and how they had enough energy to just kind of do other things, like to grow dreams, to help other people. And I was thinking like, what is so wrong with me that I can't do that? And it was like finally the fog was lifted. I was able to see that some of the ways that I was feeling, that was because I had a chemical imbalance. Some of the ways I was feeling, that was because, I had a dad who was schizophrenic and had bipolar disorder, and that kind of tends to leave you with a couple hurts and issues. So those needed to be sorted through, and I'm still working on it. But that was when I started to really feel like I need to do something else. Like I've spent so long in the dark. I don't want to see other people spend that time in the dark. There's no point in suffering when there's a way out. So it took me a long time. It took me so many different kinds of conversations with inspiring people and different experiences when I finally reached a conclusion in December that I needed to start something that really spoke to the experience that I had and that could relate to experiences that I know everybody else has. So I spoke to Sean. I was sitting there one day and I'm like, I want to start something. I don't know if it'd be like a vlog or a podcast, but I want to call it Optimistically Depressed. And Sean was like, that's a bit of a mouthful, optimistically depressed. And I was just like, well, yeah, but it perfectly describes me. So like it has to be optimistically depressed. So then Sean, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Sean D. McMullen. He's one of the most amazing people that you'd ever meet. And he went that day, made up a logo for me, and came back home and he was like, hey, so I made you this logo and here's your website. And I was like, okay, well then I guess this is happening, let's do it. So then I got a couple friends together, we discussed a couple things. We ended up starting off with a vlog and then discovered, okay, maybe it's better if we go in the direction of a podcast. So I mentioned that to Sean and then he came home with 2 mics. And he was like, all right, you want to do a podcast? Let's do this. And then we started, and it was amazing because we started doing this. I started talking with people just about how they're feeling. And all of a sudden, people like wanted to share how they're feeling. And like, how amazing is it when you can actually start talking about the way that you're feeling and other people are like, I totally know what you mean. Like, we don't have to have the same story in order to understand the same pain. And when we talk about that, then we start to understand, oh my goodness, I'm not crazy. Like, and this stuff is normal. I want to normalize mental illness. I want to normalize struggle. I want to normalize fear, anxiety, anger, all of those emotions that we look at and we kind of frown at it. It's like, oh, that's a bad emotion. You shouldn't be feeling it. Of course we should be feeling it. We're human beings. We're having experiences that are going to make us feel anxious. You think I wasn't anxious before coming up here? I am so sweaty, it's ridiculous. But that's a normal emotion, right? It's normal to be feeling this way. And it's okay to be feeling this way. And you know what? When I get all sweaty and anxious, it actually helps me do better. So well, I've done things when I was totally relaxed and I really suck. I can't think of words. So this works for me. And it's okay to be feeling this emotion. When you feel angry about something, like how many times do you hear these stories of people who've done absolutely incredible things that have changed the world? How was that sparked? I know sometimes it's sparked by compassion, yes, but what do you think comes before compassion? You're seeing something that's wrong. You're angry about it. You need to change it. It's okay to feel anger, and it's okay to talk about it because it's normal. We need to be talking about these things more often. These need to become parts of our conversations that are not unusual because our world depends on it. Life depends on it. Social media is a great tool that can be used for bringing all of these things to the light and normalizing them. It's used so often to be like, you know, look how awesome my life is, which, you know, I don't blame you. I like to do that. I like to feel awesome. It feels awesome. But what if we actually took this voice that we now have to reach way more of the world than we ever could and said, hey, I'm feeling this way. Is anybody else out there feeling this way? Hey, I'm really struggling with this. Is anybody else out there struggling with this? I'm wondering this. Do you ever wonder? I doubt decisions that I've made. Anybody else out there doubt major decisions that you've made? Like, and somehow we've tricked ourselves into thinking that if you doubt, you're not supposed to tell anybody. You're supposed to just keep going forward with confidence, right? Fake it till you make it. And I think that's like, that has its place, but it's been taken too far. I don't want to fake it anymore. I just want to be authentic. Quite honestly, I wrote out like this whole thing. I didn't even use like any of it. Because like, it's about being authentic. You're just speaking about where your passion is. And I'm such a firm believer in passion. I am such a firm believer in compassion, in understanding. And, you know, I'm a firm believer in sharing part of who you are on a platform where people will listen. Like, why not? And so who I am, I'm depressed. I have days where, honestly, like, I'm driving across the bridge to Dartmouth from Halifax, and I'm thinking, just keep going straight. Like, you got kids, this can't be part of their story. That's what I say to myself the entire way across the bridge. That's terrifying. But it's all part of it, right? I'm depressed. But that's what makes me understanding. That's what makes me compassionate. I think that's what makes me easy to talk to. You can't say things to me that I'm going to be shocked at. Chances are I felt it too. I'm optimistic. I see some opportunity. I can see that I have a really great life that I've set up with Sean, with our 3 kids, like I can see that. And I can see that I'm gonna fall down, I'm gonna get scuffed up, and I'm going to get back up. And I know that I'm gonna have days where I'm not going to feel like I'm gonna get back up. And that's normal. Now, I want to say something else that my grandma always said about me. Her and I had a pretty great relationship. And she would say about me, this is behind my back. I didn't know that she ever said this about me until my mom let me know. That I was the type of person who could fall in a pile of manure and come out with a rose. And when I heard that, I thought, Grandma must know something about me that I don't know, because I didn't feel like I was that kind of person. And now I see that she was right. And I'm so proud. And you know what? Another thing is, I can feel proud of who I am, and that's okay too. You know, like that whole false modesty thing? I got really nervous. I got really nervous before this. I was like, I'm gonna kind of stink it up a little bit. But then in my head, I was also like, no, I'm gonna rock this because I'm pretty good at public speaking. So this is gonna be okay, right? And that's kind of cocky, so you don't wanna like really share it because I'm, and then also if you end up kind of sucking, then you're like, oh my gosh, I was just really wrong about that. But no, I see that my grandma was right. And I feel like I have something that I can really contribute. I have something that I can contribute to the world. And that's the thing, like we each have something that we can contribute to the world. There is a passion there, and even if it might be a passion that has been born out of real struggle or pain, sometimes that's the best stuff. I hope that some of the stuff that I had to say could help encourage some of you, maybe spark something that's inside of you that you realize you could really do something with it. I know that I've been fortunate enough to have people around me that have believed in me and my abilities to help me realize that I do have something to contribute, even on my darkest days. So thank you, all of you, so much for listening to me. And